What's up, mortgage family? Welcome to this week's Pro Performance. Today we'll be speaking on why deals stall and how to reignite them without starting over. My name is Curtis Schneider. I am Rocket Pro's Senior Account Manager of Business Development at Rocket Pro. My role focuses on bridging the gap between the military community and the broker community. I'm celebrating my 10th season within the organization. I have two amazing sons. Been married about 18 years to my beautiful wife. And today on the call, we also have the 8-day closing giant, aka Chief Loan Officer of Always Approved Capital. Matthew, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Curtis, thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be chatting with the Rocket Pro family. I'm the owner of Always Approved Capital. We are a mortgage brokerage here based out of the Bay Area. I actually started my career in banking. I had a securities license working at JP Morgan. So I was managing portfolios for high net worth clients, essentially going down the path of a financial advisor. While working at the bank, I noticed that the loan officers were actually making just as much money and a lot less stressed. So that was initially where I got my first introduction to mortgage back in 2015. Although I didn't do any loans, it kind of was in the back of my mind. I actually transitioned from banking into the tech industry. Was there for about 6.5 years in the startup space doing tech sales, so selling SaaS. And interesting enough, during the end of the pandemic, I had a lot of friends reach out to me asking, where can I go for a refinance? I had referred a few loans to a few buddies, and in my head, I'm like, hey, why don't I do this? So I got licensed in the end of 2022, and started doing loans while doing tech sales. I actually decided to go full time in 2024, and the rest is history. So right now, I'm the mortgage broker owner of Always Approved Capital. I'm also a real estate agent with Coldwell Banker, and I also dabble in some real estate investments. So that's essentially the trajectory and where I am today.
Man, thank you for that. It's crazy tech sales, but just it baffles me when I hear 8-day closing, right? But yeah, like everything, we always knock out these partner promises, right? Today we're gonna be going over tech that works faster so you don't have to. This promise aligns with a strong follow-up system and workflow automation to help brokers maintain momentum. Um, that momentum, man. I'll tell you what, with the 8-day, this is a great pro performance for you to actually be joining and having those conversations. But, some of the outcomes that we're going to be looking to do, of course, I like to read through these like a military service member does. Identify, recognize, re-engage, and maintain. One, identify the most common reasons purchase deals stall. Two, recognize early signals that borrower momentum is fading. Three, re-engage borrowers and agents with strategic follow-up to reposition stalled deals without restarting the process. And lastly, four, maintain the pipeline discipline during busy purchase seasons. All right, so we're going to be going into some, just when you're looking at these, Matthew, I see why deals stall. We got buyers pausing their home search, documentation delays, credit or financial concerns, agent communication breakdown, and uncertainty around affordability and rates. So when you see some of the top common reasons, right? What uh what are your thoughts on these, man? Do you think these are legitimate?
Yeah, really good question. I do think that these five bullets are things and reasons why some purchases do slow down. So, for example, the first one, the buyer pausing the home search, inventory can be limited, especially here in the Bay Area. Inventory is extremely limited. So you might have, buyers on the sidelines that are ready to purchase. It's just there's no home that fits the needs. And it's also to stay important, or it's important to stay engaged while they're essentially paused or on the sidelines waiting. Documentation delays. I think this kind of sits with the loan officer and setting expectations very early on with the clients and also the realtor. I can't tell you how many times the realtor will come back, hey, I heard the clients, applied. And I'm like, no, they haven't applied yet or they haven't uploaded documentation. So setting a precedent between both parties and kind of have a sense of ownership with that and just having a complete file. Same thing with the credit or financial concerns. There is a lot of misinformation out there. I can't tell you how many times, I say about half of my job is debunking myths that they heard on TikTok or Instagram or social media in general. So what we do is we need to make sure we ask any of these open-ended questions and figure out what are maybe some immediate hurdles that we can overcome. And agent communication. At the end of the day, the agents and the realtors are our biggest asset. They're our biggest partners. So how do we create this collaboration or this camaraderie between the agent and the buyers and making sure we are all in sync? And then the last thing is the uncertainty around affordability and rates. Ever since the rates have gone up, the question always is like, what is the rate today? What is the rate today? And it's important to also kind of set expectations with the buyer, also to let them know that, hey, I understand you may be curious about the rate, but it's important to understand that the rates do change every day. And if you don't make that very clear, a client might have asked you for the rate, say maybe 2 weeks ago, and then maybe the rates have improved. And they're not comparing apples to apples. They're comparing your higher interest rate from 2 weeks ago with maybe another lender with a lower rate. And essentially that's how you'll lose a deal. So I always like to give a little bit of a range to kind of dangle the carrot. And once again, re-emphasize that the rates do change every day. And if they are planning to make an offer, let's have that rate conversation closer to the offer date. And then lastly, explain that a lot of lenders will quote rates, or a lot of the rates they'll see online have points. So explain kind of the points dynamic, and then that way you will be seen as the thought leader in the space, and they'll come back to you because they trust you.
Of that, man. It sounds like there's a lot of consistency with communication to build that rapport, specifically for these deals, right? So moving into identifying the stall, I think that's the biggest piece that a lot of our broker partners, right, they'll get into is just maintaining that pipeline, right? So um, I'd ask the question, what are some warning signs that a deal is about to stall?
Yeah, I think immediately is you ask yourself as a loan officer, what is going to get this client to the finish line? And I think this is where a lot of loan officers struggle. A lot of loan officers think that this is a financial role. Very much this is a sales role. In fact, we're therapists. We're constantly making the client feel comfortable and engaging with them. So we really need to understand what is it that is going to get them to the finish line? Is it a baby on the way? Are they needing to upgrade because the kids are going to high school, they want to go to a better school district, and then also connecting the dots with the agent here. So communication is key. And as long as you're trying to understand what is the motive behind the purchase, I think you'll be okay.
That's great to hear, man. So um, moving into the next slide, we're talking about that strategic follow-up. You talked a lot about communication, right? What are some best practices in supporting just a healthy dialogue with your clients?
Yeah, so I think also it's to understand one is the timeline, right? They mentioned, hey, like I'm, about 6 months out. So the strategic follow-up, what I'll do sometimes is I'll send listings that maybe will fit into their bucket or what they're trying to purchase. Um, Also, once again, staying re-engaged with the realtor. I cannot stress how important this is. At the end of the day, most of the relationship sits with the realtor because the realtor is referring over the buyer. So they will have the in on what is needed to win the business. And a lot of times I'll reach back out to the agent and say, hey, look, I had a phenomenal call with, buyer one, buyer two. What is some feedback you can share? And say, hey, Matt, they really liked you. They mentioned, X, Y, and Z. And find if there was any factors that might maybe put me in the back running. So I'm gonna say maybe, hey, Matt, your rate was a little too high, or hey, Matt, they had a specific question, they weren't sure. And then now I can follow up back on the client and say, hey, I spoke to agent number one. They said, hey, you had some questions about this. Do you have maybe 10 minutes of chat tonight? I would love to answer those questions for you. Um, and another way I stay engaged also is I don't know if anybody else does this in the industry, but I purposely don't send a standard pre-approval letter. And hear me out here. What I do is all my pre-approval letters, I actually tie it directly to an offer. So I'll let the client know, hey, look, you're qualified for this amount, assuming these variables are true, 20% down, 800 credit score, no debts. And then I'll let the client know, hey, I'll typically send out the pre-approval attached to the offer. And my rationale behind, or at least the client says, hey, well, say you're approved for 2 million, and you only want to purchase for 1.5. I don't want to expose you to the upside to the listing agent and the seller. So in the buyer's perspective, it's like, oh, well, Matt has my best interest. And also I explained that, hey, having a more recently dated pre-approval letter shows confidence to the listing agent that, we had these conversations about the property, and also you have the property address. So it just looks much more professional. But what that also does on the lender side or the loan officer side, it allows me to stay engaged throughout the process, because every single time a client wants to make an offer, I'm knowing exactly when and where, and I'm able to have these conversations, which a lot of times revolve around the interest rates. So that's how I'm also able to stay engaged throughout the process.
Yeah. We love those conversations about interest rates, don't we? I swear.
They're
Um,
always coming up. You can't avoid them. I would say on average, I'm probably going against anywhere from 3 to 5 lenders, right?
yeah.
And it's important to once again just let them know, hey, the rates do change every single day, and ask them and explain, hey, what are you seeing out there, right? What are you seeing out there? And also, I do want to add, it's also important for you to explain to the agent how there's a difference between mortgage brokers and loan officers at the bank. So loan officers at the bank, their rates typically are pretty set in stone. You might be able to get, maybe a difference of 0.125 if they're a top producer. But as a mortgage broker, we have a lot of leverage. So what I also do is I go to the agent and say, hey, what are the clients telling you for the interest rates? So I know how close I need to be at the end of the day. So that's also another tool I use.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the theme is it's a communication factor, right? So, speaking into that, we're moving on to repositioning the opportunity, right? And I know we've talked at length about preparation, all these good things, right? And we're talking about those stalled deals. I really want to learn, what tools are you currently using to ensure consistency with follow-up? Any technology use cases you can share?
Yeah, there's really kind of, three things. One is going to be my LOS. When I go into my LOS system, I'm able to see all my recent applications and kind of see where they are in the funnel, and then essentially just re-engage. Second thing that I do, maybe a little uniquely, is for all my clients, and also even with my agents, what I do is I coach them to have communication via text message only. From my experience, I found that communication via email tends to be a little delayed and there's a little bit less engagement. So I always tell the agent, when they want to make an introduction, I say, hey, do it via text. And if the client does have an iPhone, I even go to as far as changing the title of the group chat. I'll say buyer one, buyer two's real estate team. And notice I put the emphasis on team because I'm trying to create this, camaraderie of this team environment. I even go as far into changing the emoji to the house. So on the client's perspective, like, oh, this is a nice little touch because I promise you, no other loan officer is doing this. And then on the operations side, on my end, I'm able to go through my text message thread, and I know which text message thread is business because it says real estate team and it has that home emoji. So just following up through that, and then once again, kind of re-engaging how I do that as well as just asking if they have any questions about the interest rate. I think, what happens is when you have the first initial consult with a client or even the second consult, there's a lot of information. It's kind of like analysis paralysis. And, I always close like, hey, is there any questions that I can answer? At that time, they're bombarded with data and information, so they don't have those questions. But I do promise you those questions do come up and they come up usually right before they go to bed. And what ends up happening is sometimes a client is shy. They don't want to bother you. They think, you're busy. So what they'll do is they'll research online and then they'll go down this rabbit hole, this click funnel, and next they're applying with another lender. So there's a lot of misinformation. So make yourself available. I always say presence and be present and be passionate. And then that's ultimately listening to the client to work with you.
Great. That's just such a great just mentality, right? Like I talk about this with my wife about being present with our children when we're, when we're together, right? Like I think it's the same thing in business. You have to be present. You have to be engaged. You have to turn on those that technology, your ears, right? And actually listen to what people are saying. So that's amazing. I got a little controversy though, because I'm team, Android. So I'm
Uh-oh.
sure that's got to be a pain in the butt for some of your people you work with, right? Or is that a thing out west? Is everyone got Apple?
I'd say a lot of people have Apple. Apple is down the street from where I live. I can throw a rock and it'll hit the headquarters. But the good thing, with the advances in technology, I can still actually change the group chat name. So at least on my end, it reflects. And then I think on some Android users, it does actually show that as well. So they've made some efforts to keep up with this Apple users.
I love it, man. I gotta call it out. But all right, so moving on to the agent collaboration piece, right? Like, so from you being, I want to call you the 8-day gunslinger, right? But
Yeah.
what are some good habits that you have and you would recommend to the audience to prevent delays and from deals going quiet, right?
Yeah. Once again, it's syncing with the agent. A lot of times that relationship or the trust with the buyer sits with the agent. So just syncing in with the agent, hey, what are some feedback that you heard from our initial call? Whether it's the interest rates, maybe it's some concerns. A lot of clients sometimes will have a concern like who is always approved? You're a mortgage broker. Why am I not going to work with, a big bank versus a broker? So kind of reinstilling some trust. But you need to ask those questions with the agent. Quite frankly, I'm very direct. I say, what do I need to do to earn the business or win the deal? And I'll ask that directly with an agent. And I'll also put the client on the spotlight, say, hey, look, I'd love to work with you. I think we're a great fit. What do I need to do to get to earn the business? And a lot of times asking for that upfront commitment. Um, because here's the reality. A lot of the deals actually don't stall. They really don't. What ends up happening is the loan officer just doesn't make it to the finish line. The buyer does buy, and it's just you're not involved and you're there on the finish line. And that honestly, in my opinion, happens a lot because of just lack of engagement, lack of follow-up, and just honestly not alleviating some of the concerns. We have to be very empathetic. I do we do a lot of business, and I think a lot of times we can kind of get away to help understand or be empathetic that we are helping a first-time home buyer in most cases make their largest purchase of their entire life. Can you imagine the emotions and the stress behind that?
Yeah.
And they don't teach you this in college, they don't teach you this in high school. So put yourself in the buyer's shoes. They're having to absorb all this information and make a very critical and very expensive decision. So just being very empathetic of that and just driving with some emotional intelligence. And I think if you lead with that and being sincere, I think the buyer is going to see that and ultimately want to work with you.
Yeah, speaking from past experience too, like I'm agreeing with you 100%, right? Is being present, the emotional intelligence of having those conversations it is so paramount in taking care of people, right? Like, because you don't, I mean, unless and when you're in these conversations with your partners, like you're getting to know their family, you're getting to know the intimacies of what is going on in their life, like no other essentially person is or has ever done before, right? So that's really, really awesome. Um, that's some impactful stuff when you think about that, Matthew. Like, so let me ask you this: like, is there any like stories you could share about helping those first time home buyers? I know for me, retiring out of the military, I had one of the craziest stories ever of coming out of the military into civilian life. But I'd love to hear from you since you are like I said, the 8-day closing gunslinger, right? Like, what are some good technology you're using to help clients along?
Yeah, so once again, just I think making the process as simple as possible. If you go through the conventional guideline handbook, we're going through hundreds and thousands of pages. So just really making it simple for everyone to digest the data. And as far as the 8-day close, that is something actually I take pride in. So in my market here, a lot of the business is, highly competitive. We have anywhere from 10 to 50 offers, non-contingent. So what I've been able to do is leverage an 8-day close, essentially beat out a lot of the cash offers. I attribute a lot of my success through my LOS system Arrive and honestly the Rocket Pro portal. As a loan officer who has used all the other portals in the wholesale space, will tell you that the Rocket Pro portal is so easy and very efficient to use. In fact, you don't even need to use a processor. In fact, I don't even use a processor for all my business. And the ease of it's just very intuitive. And this is also speaking from my tech background. I sold software for 6 years. So coming from that space and going into the Rocket portal just makes my business so easy. And I wouldn't be able to move as fast as I'm able to without it. So I'm forever grateful, using tools like Rocket Connect, and of course, having the support and leadership of the Rocket Pro, crew directors, is the reason why I'm successful today. So very, very, very grateful. And I attribute a lot of my business and success to that because how I'm able to do that is I'm able to differentiate as a loan officer and as a mortgage broker in general. I have buyer agents call me and say, hey, Matt, I need the 8-day magic. Can we do this? Because they want their buyer to win against, 10, 15 offers. And even ironically, what ends up happening is my business has expanded to now the listing agents. So the listing agent will, give me a call and just say, hey, can you really close in 8-day? And I always joke about this. I said, I can't wait to show you and be your new loan officer. So that's essentially how I've expanded my book of business, and the agent network is doing good business. And it's a combination of and I mentioned this earlier, is setting expectations with the client, being very direct. Hey, these are the documents I need. This is what's going to happen next. And I always tell people the job of the loan officer is really two things. We wear two hats. First one's a project manager, where the one individual that talks to almost every single person in the transaction, from the buyers, listing agents, the AMC, the underwriters, title coordinator, escrow officer. So we have to know where the ball is at all times. So getting the next person in line, getting them ready. And then number two, we are like an attorney, right? In underwriting, as you guys know, it's guilty until proven innocent. So, making sure, allowing the underwriter to do the job properly and making sure we're submitting a clean file. So just, doing all that and just being organized definitely does help as well.
Yeah, that means a lot. I mean, I know we're on a pro performance talking about it, but like it's good to hear from our broker partners actually talking about our technology working in their business, right, and every day. But let's move on to the review piece, right? Like I know we talked earlier, specifically when dissecting early review, the outcomes that we talked about earlier were identify, recognize, re-engage, and maintain. We can all agree that we should get to the point in our life and what we're doing in our business to have good habits set, early preparation, consistency with communication. But sometimes just life just happens, right? Like, and we're talking about those deals stalling out. But some best practices from our discussion are obviously monitoring that pipeline, healthy, regular to identify stalls, right? So stall, like that's the biggest piece, right? And like you said earlier on that, we want to make sure we're in those conversations, having those conversations with those clients, right? And then two, addressing stalled deals early. Like it kind of molds into the same piece, right? And maintaining consistent borrower communication to reposition stalled deals. And lastly, use structured follow-up systems to re-engage opportunities. So, some actionable commitments, right? And we talked about these, I think, at length going through practice, right? I love for you to kind of define these and go to these talking points a little bit.
Yeah. Um, a lot of times, I'll just randomly text, an agent, say, hey, is there any, specific buyers I can help out with? To be very frank, I'm on Instagram or social media quite a bit. Um, and it's not even me posting actual like stuff on my page. It's more so just re-engaging with agents. So a lot of times they'll post something, they're in contract. And I'll reply. I said, please let me know if there's something I can do to earn the business. Kind of a graceful request. And, I'd say about 50% that, I'm able to maybe get a conversation in. And ultimately, so that's kind of the new business. The existing business, once again, is just checking in, asking what was the last conversation you had with the buyer? Why are we not moving forward? And then once again, always asking, is there anything that I can do? You'd be surprised. A lot of times I'll check in. It's like, hey, is there anything I can do? They say, oh yeah, man, actually, they actually wanted to know the monthly payment. I'm like, yes, please let me know. I'll reach back out to the client. So you just need to always be asking. You'd be surprised how much can fall through the cracks just because you're not staying top of mind and staying relevant. So keep
Right.
asking. It will pay dividends, I promise.
Yeah. And then also, going into two, right? We're talking about those 30 days. For you, I don't even know, like, how does that work? Like the follow-up with clients that stalled deals in 30 days or 60 days, like you're at 8 days, right? So it sounds like it's mostly leading with that consistency with communication, right? And that re-engagement, like you were just saying, right? So hitting that really, really hard. So that's kind of the same topic. But lastly, identify the value you could bring your clients by reviewing deals and promotions. So speak to that. I mean, we talked about changing it up a little bit, right? Depending on the situation of what the client is dealing with.
Yeah, so for in the follow-up with the clients, once again, just checking in to see if there's any questions I may have, or also giving them like updates on the rate. Say, hey, look, the rates drop. This is what it looks like today versus, hey, this is the rate that we spoke, 30 days ago. But sometimes there's not much you can do, especially if inventory is tight. Maybe they're waiting on specific gift funds. So once again, just staying relevant and being polite. And that's what keeps you top of mind. As far as like identifying the value, every transaction is different. And this is where you need to dig deep and understand, what are your strengths and weaknesses in the space. So in a lot of my business, it's honestly just, I call it white glove service.
Yeah.
And the 8-day close and being fully non-contingent is really my bread and butter. And that's something where I can differentiate against other lenders, where they'll speak to, 3, 4 lenders, they'll be able to close in 21 days and they might have like a 5-day loan contingency. I do a fully underwritten approval, and that's kind of my commitment up front. Hey, this is what we can do. Here's how we can get you in the door. Or it could also be that we're able to offer another product. In fact, today I'm actually taking over a loan from a big bank. They're falling out of escrow, and the agent calls me 22 days into escrow. Hey, man, you just saved the deal. So my value prop is having access to other programs, such as the bank statement loan program, which Rocket Mortgage does offer, and the loan is getting submitted through Rocket Pro. So but you have to remind them, hey, these are other programs I have access to. Or honestly, also just being a mortgage expert. I can't tell you how many times I've had a lot of deals fall in my lap, and it was as simple as structuring the loan a little differently. Maybe they didn't understand the difference between the Fannie or the Freddie Mae guidelines, but that value sits with you as a loan officer. You are the subject matter expert. How can you structure the file to where you're able to earn the business, but also the client is able to benefit in the end?
You know, just listening to this where we started and where we are at right now, I think for both sides of the house, right? With us helping with technology and being a partner with you and you taking care of clients, right? Like at the end of the day, it's always about the client, right? And like we talked about earlier, the decision can be the largest financial decision of their lives, right? Being present, being in person and listening to your clients with everything that you went over, right? A lot of great nuggets in this call today. So I really, really appreciate you taking the time to actually go through this in depth, right? And like every other pro performance, we have to call out the next pro performance that's coming up. It's going to be April 30th, and it's going to be based off of how to get to pre-approval in under 24 hours. So again, Matthew, man, I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining us on this pro performance. Just want to open up the floor one last time before we end the call. But any one solid nugget for our broker partners that are listening in.
One solid advice. I honestly, um, partnership and collaboration, and sincerity. And I like to use the 3 Ps. So um, being present, being patient, and being passionate, and just being that person that they can go to. And, quite frankly, also on the agent side, just being the person that answers the phone, and being present. So that's really it, making yourself available, and, doing good business. We're in the business of helping people get home. It's a very rewarding business. And we're in a very blessed position to be able to do such an amazing job. So
I
that's
love
it.
it.
Have fun, and be a good person.
Absolutely, Matthew. Thank you again, man. Have a wonderful week.